Good to be here. My name is Kenneth Pelletier, and in the next 5 minutes, we're going to look at the epigenetics of pain, and then in the subsequent 5 minutes, looking at the epigenetics of longevity. Next. So it's epigenetics is really means above, around, or surrounding. My research in this area began the mid-70s when we actually studied a series of adept meditators at UCSF School of Medicine. This is one of them. And they would inflict wounds, in this case, sharpened bicycle spokes through the face. They would pierce their biceps, forearms. And we looked at what did the stress response look like, both in terms of acute and long-term stress response. Next. When we mapped the long-term stress response, what we found is this was really ultimately the most destructive. You can see the elevation in phase 2 of sympathetic arousal, and then you can see the crash in marked 3 of parasympathetic dominance, when the body just exceeds its ability to adapt, and it could be a headache, a gastrointestinal problem, a heart attack, or even death. But it's basically is what forces the body to stop this process of sympathetic arousal. Next. So this type 2 stress response, which is really the destructive form, is really thousands of receptors are in and on every cell. Every emotion, thought, and action releases a peptide cascade in the human body. These peptides bind to the receptors and change the structure and function of every cell in the body. The result is cellular death, apoptosis, and most importantly, what we're realizing more recently, damage to the mitochondria, or a central spark plug of every cell, leads to the excessive accumulation of excessive byproducts. Those byproducts are inherently destructive to the function of the cell. Next. And what we get as a prolonged response is a leaky gut is a common symptom. The mucus lining is reduced, leads to obesity, depression, irritable bowel, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, pain, which we'll see a bit about shortly, and overall functional GI disorders. Testosterone is reduced, epinephrine increases, so you have a more fight-flight anxiety, excessive activation of the pituitary adrenal cortical axis, all are elevated and sustained. The fourth bullet point, the OxyContin system is depressed, so you have decreased pleasure, social attachment, maternal, and sexual pleasures are all reduced. And lastly, the vagal tone is reduced, resulting in the freeze component of the fight-flight response, freeze. Next. Now, this occurs because of a simple mechanism in epigenetics called single nucleotide polymorphisms, or like all things is more complicated than it seems. But SNPs are like a glove or a molecular coating around every gene. And these are rheostats that can be turned up or turned down. And this is the way the body biochemistry interacts with the genes in the cell of every organism. Next. So what we're doing now is we're mapping out what we're calling a tripartite assay using a construction model. So the gene is like the blueprint. The second is the blood, which is the building of the house. What does the body do with the blueprint? And lastly, the microbiome, which is what's it like to live in the house, and mapping out the interconnection between these three levels. Next. And in the area of chronic pain, what we're looking at is the epigenetic changes which mediate between acute to chronic pain. There are three major epigenetic mechanisms. The DNA methylation, which is punctuation. It simply is a way to tell the body it's a word, it's a sentence, it's a paragraph, it tells the story of the DNA. The histone modification regulates chromatin as a DNA scaffold, and that can be destroyed by these excessive levels of biochemical activity. And non-coding RNA is what silences or enhances gene expression. What we have found is that the genetic variant DRD2 is present in patients with severe pain. The variant DRD1 is present with mild pain. Next. So we're in this situation of my mind and body hate each other. Charlie Brown always says it so well. Next. And so the direct impact of epigenetics have been implicated in a wide range of physical disorders: coronary heart disease, irritable bowel cancer, Parkinson's, mental illness, including depression and schizophrenia. It leads to individuals consuming comfort foods, which generate abdominal obesity. The third, it shortens and frays the telomeres, leading to reduced life expectancy. And we'll see a bit more about that in the next presentation. And it creates blood sugar imbalances or type 2 diabetes, and then the use of continuing glucose monitors. Next. So what we're looking at ideally is to create an optimal performance zone where a person has techniques to be able to know when stress has become excessive, reduce it, and stay within an optimal performance zone. Next. So, and these are all mediated, it's the last PowerPoint, by chronic adult stress levels and poor coping, early life events. PTSD affects how we respond to stress, sex and gender, physical activity, environmental quality, and finally, the lack of effective stress management practices. Okay, next. And more details on this can be found in my most recent book, Change Your Genes, Change Your Life, or articles and references on my website, drpelletier.com. So thank you very much, and I hope this has been helpful.